Hi, I'm Lauren. Welcome to my channel. Thank you so much for joining me here. Today I'm going to be exploring more neurographic art, which this particular piece of neurographic art, I have a video about how I made it. I'll link that down below in the description so you can see kind of how to do it. I recently created this piece, which was done in kind of a similar way to the first one. And I also used like a little bit of gold and silver with Posca markers. Most of this artwork was done with sharpies, and I added some little detailing patterns and things like that with pens and white little pens as well. So these were two neurographic art pieces that I created. I really loved how colorfully these two turned out. And before I get into the start of this video, I kind of wanted to show you a few other pieces of neurographic art that I've been doing. So this is a little sketchbook tour. Here's one that turned out this way. And then this one I had in my previous video as well. I showed you kind of how I created this. In this one, I decided I would stick with a color theme, so I chose like all different greens, and that's how that turned out. And then we have a purple one, purples and pinks, and sort of pastels and bright kind of tones as well. And then a warm toned with the yellows, reds, and oranges. I like how vibrant this one is. And this did the same once again with blues as well, a little bit of gray in the middle there. So these are just some different ideas of how you could be adding color to neurographic art. And in this one, I did a sort of picture in the middle, which was like satin. And then I sort of worked out to the edge of the paper from that middle piece. So that turned out that way. And this one, I really like how this one kind of looks like a road map, which is kind of an interesting, I keep thinking of road maps every time I look at or create neurographic art. It's almost like a road map of the inside of your head, really. It's like all your thoughts kind of down on a piece of paper, and it kind of helps you get like a higher perspective or on your thoughts and sort of what's going on in your head. So today I'm going to be jumping into inks. These are some different inks that I really like to use, and we're going to be using these to create the first neurographic art piece. So I'm going to be showing you 3 different styles or ways of doing neurographic art. This piece, I'm going to work actually on the background first and do the backgrounds using different inks. So I have here like this purple ink. These are all from Koh-i-Noor, and there's also Sennelier, which is another type of ink brand that I like to use. I've been doing Inktober's for quite a few years, so I would often, because I always get kind of like tired of just using black and white, so I would always get like a little bit of colored ink and kind of incorporate those into my Inktober pieces. So let's get started on this first piece. And what I'm going to do now is just lay down some water onto my paper and get like as much water on there as possible. Okay, so once you have like your paper as sort of much water on there as possible, then you take the inks, and I'm calling this one background first style. And you drop a bunch of ink onto your paper. You can water it a bit more down if you want, but I kind of like to just like drop the ink and then let it like spread into the water. And it's always quite fun to see how the ink sort of moves in the water, and it's quite like relaxing to watch actually when you do it yourself. So yeah, I just added a tiny bit more water in there, spread it out a little bit more, and then I moved to another color, which is green, splashed that around. I really like with ink how it's sort of, when you add it to water onto paper, just kind of ends up creating this really interesting looking sort of piece in itself, you know. So next step was I dabbed it down a little bit, and then I added into the white spaces this yellow. So I wanted the yellow to stay like bright. So I decided I would just paint it directly on instead of like splashing it on, because I was worried if I splashed it on it would become like too green. But it was interesting how or quite nice actually, how the yellow mixed in with the blue on the edges and became like a kind of added a little bit more green as well to the artwork. So that was quite nice. So now that the piece is kind of finished with all the ink, it does need some time to dry. So I'm going to put that aside and start working on the next piece. For this next piece, my thoughts immediately went to water. This is one I created the other night. And today I'll show you kind of a similar, or how to create a piece like this. You want to take your paper, and this time instead of using black to start with your lines, you're going to take a color and create your lines with the color. So I decided I would use blue ink because my mind was going towards water and kind of how fluid and flowy it is. So I decided I would do with blue ink the kind of shapes, and the shapes even I was making them look like water as much as possible, little water droplets, and then creating the lines going across. And as you know, with neurographic art, the next step is to create your rounded corners. Okay, so I finished rounding all the corners, and yeah, whenever you work with inks, just note it's gonna be really messy. And also another note is to keep your window open or work near an open window, because sometimes the smell can be quite strong, which can be a little bit distracting. So just those are some suggestions. Now we'll come back to that piece in a few moments. And now the third piece, which is I call it like an inverse technique. You're going to create on black paper using any kind of white material. So I'm using here white acrylic paint, and I'm creating my starting shapes using this white, and then I'm going to just carry on with the piece in this white way. So it sort of has a look of being an inverse type of artwork, which I thought was kind of a different way of doing neurographic art and just sort of nice to change it up a bit. Okay, so this is the third piece that is halfway finished. Now it needs to dry for a bit, and I'm going to go back to the first picture, which was the background first. And now that the ink is dry on the paper, I'm going to take a black ink, but you could also use black marker if you want to do this technique, or you could use black paint as well. Any sort of black Posca marker would also work. And you want to start creating your shapes onto your colored background. Then using the normal technique of rounding your corners, using the black ink or black art material that you've chosen. And I really, really like how the black kind of comes out against that really, really colorful black background. I think it's like a interesting look to it and kind of a different way of doing it. So the other thing I did after that was I then took some white acrylic paint, but you could use, of course, any white art material as well. And I created some little detailing inside some of the shapes to help kind of make them stand out a little bit more and just add some like different interesting points on the very colorful black background. Now we're going to work on the second one again, which is the water-themed one, using the blue color or any kind of color that you want to use first instead of using a black color. So I'm going to take watercolors and add the watercolors kind of like water-themed tones, so blues and like a little bit of greens here and there, and paint the inside of my shapes that I've got. Then at the end, when I'd added all my watercolor, I took some white paint again and just added a little bit of white paint to some of the edgings of the shapes. You can see that the ink kind of blended a little bit in with the watercolors, but that's okay. Like water is, fluid and flowy, and it's okay. This is just, whenever you're creating neurographic art, it's really just a fun experiment, and it's a time to be mindful and just focus on relaxing and calming down. So this is kind of how this one turned out. And now let's finish off the last one, which is the one that I created, like the inverse one. So I took some pastel tones that I had, and I am painting those onto the different areas. They turned out being quite light when I put the first coat, so I had to do like 2 or 3 coats of these colors. They're acrylic colors that I'm using here. In this piece, I kind of like to leave a little bit of black spaces, but I found that I have these paint containers from IKEA actually, in all sort of neon tones. So I used these to create little dots around some of the edgings of the piece in all different colors. And I added also some like line details and went around a couple of the colored areas using these IKEA paints. So when the paint is finished, it looks like this when it's wet, but this paint actually dries flat. So I'll show you in a few moments what it looked like when it's dry. So this is when it's dry, and these are the 3 different styles that I created in this video. The background one, the water one, and the inverse one. So I really hope that this video gives you some different ideas of how to create neurographic art in, some interesting ways. I really like how all of these turned out, the vibrant colors and how different they each look from each other. So thank you so much for joining me here. If you like this video, please do like it and subscribe. And I'll definitely see you guys again soon for another video.